We talk about the history of Christmas. Christmas actually started in not the kind of Christmas that we have, but the history of Christmas started in Northern Europe with the Norwegians, the Swedish, the Danish. At the end of the year, they would kill all of their animals and just have a drunken brawl for about 2 or 3 weeks until they ran out of meat. They killed all their animals down to their brood stock, and they would drink and just have an orgy and a type of Mardi Gras all the way from about the 20th of December on through as long as they had food and drink until they drank it, and then they would starve until springtime. Well, when the Puritans came over here to America, they outlawed Christmas here because they thought that Christmas leading to that type of an orgy type situation was not good, and so it was not Christian. And they actually banned it in America in the early time. As you look in your little overview, I think that you have it down there. Back in the 1600s, the Puritans made it illegal to even mention the name of St. Nicholas. All right? Now, last week, I'll just kind of review it just a little bit. How do we get the word Santa Claus or St. Nicholas or St. Nick or all of this?
Nicholas was the guy that was giving the money to the guy that had
Okay, there was a preacher in Asia Minor that his name was Nicholas, and his family were very rich. He used to give money to the poor little kids. They would buy them food, candy, different things. He'd buy for them and give them out. And his name was Nicholas. The Catholic Church later made him a saint, Saint Nicholas. All right, Saint Nick. And we get our word Santa Claus, Sinterklaas in Dutch, all from that name. One man, the real famous story that made him famous, and the stockings that you hang on the hearth and all of this stuff, you know where all this came from? The stockings came from what happened with Nicholas again. There was a man that had 3 daughters, and he was very poor, so he was going to sell his daughters when they came of age into prostitution. And that happened a lot back then. They had to have a dowry. So whenever one of these girls, the first one came to age, about 13 or 14 years old, so she could get married, he was going to sell her into prostitution. So Nicholas went by and threw in a bag of gold, and it happened to land by the hearth, and they put their shoes and socks there to dry every night. And he went by there late at night and threw into the open window and a sack of gold landed in one of the shoes and socks. Well, the man got up and found the gold in there, so he married his daughter off. He had a dowry for her. Well, the next one come of age, and he did the same thing. He was going to sell her into prostitution because he had used up all the money for the other one's dowry. So Nicholas came by and he threw through the window again, and it landed in the shoes and the stockings. And this happened twice to this guy. So the third daughter comes up, and he is going to do the same thing with her, and in comes the window with a bag of gold and lands in the shoes again, and the socks. So then people started putting out their socks and hanging them up by the hearth, so maybe they'd have a bag of gold in them. All right? That's how all that stocking business got started, okay? Now, historically, on page 2 of your little deal here, okay? So the Santa Claus came from, it's just you know, sometimes like the word baptized, it came from Greek. It's not an English word. The word baptized means to immerse. The Church of England decided to not translate the word baptized because if they translated it immerse in the King James Bible, then the people would know in the Church of England and even in the Catholics that they were baptizing by the wrong mode. If you call John the Dipper or John the Immerser, they would know that he was John the Dipper. He dipped people. and they were sprinkling and pouring at that time, so they decided not to do it. Whereas Santa Claus and Santa Claus, it's like Saint Nicholas, but it's just kind of a slur into other language. Brother Bill.
You mean John the Baptist wasn't really called John the Baptist, he's called John the Dipper,
Yes.
John the Immerser.
Yes. That's what he
Baptism
was.
was a word we come up with later on.
Yes. The Church of England did that in the King James translation of the Bible. They said, let's don't translate anything in this Bible that would be contrary to what we believe as a doctrine. As a matter of fact, they would do it on pain of death. Okay. On page number 2. 1600s, Puritans made it illegal to mention St. Nicholas' name. People were not allowed to exchange gifts, light a candle, or sing Christmas carols. That's in America, okay? The 17th century, the early Dutch immigrants brought with them a legend of Sinterklaas. That's Santa Claus or St. Nicholas, okay? Same guy. 1773, Santa first appeared in the media as Saint Claus, okay? 1804, the New York Historical Society was founded with St. Nicholas as a patron saint, okay? Its members engaged in the Dutch practice of gift giving at Christmas, and that's in 1804. 1809, Washington Irving, writing under the pseudonym Dietrich Knickerbocker, included St. Nicholas in his book, History of New York. Nicholas is described as riding in town on a horse, okay? In 1812, Irving revised his book to include Nicholas riding over the trees in a wagon. Now, is it coming in now? Mm-hmm. All right. In 1812, all right, 1821, William Gilly printed a poem about Santa Claus, who was dressed in a fur and drove a sleigh drawn by a single reindeer. Okay. In 1822, dentist Clement Clark Moore is believed by many to have written the poem, An Account of Visit from St. Nicholas, which became better known as The Night Before Christmas. Okay? He had 3 daughters. He had written this actually for them, and it was only supposed to be used in their home. It was a story that he had written for and the daughters got a hold of it and then published it. Okay? Santa is portrayed as an elf with miniature sleigh equipped with 8 reindeer, which were named in the poem Blitzen, Comet, Cupid, Dancer, Dasher, Donder, Prancer, and Vixen. Others attribute the poem to a contemporary Henry Livingston Jr., but actually it was Moore that wrote it. In 1841, J.W. Parkinson, a Philadelphia merchant, hired a man to dress up as Kris Kringle. Same thing. Kris Kringle, outfit and climb the chimney of his store. All right, now here we got the chimney business. Okay, is it all coming together? 1863, Thomas Nast created images of Santa Claus for the Christmas editions of the Harper's Magazine. These continued through the 1890s. In 1860, President Abraham Lincoln asked Nast to create a drawing of Santa Claus with some Union soldiers. All right. Before that, the Union did not think much of Christmas. But now...
I saw that picture last week.
Oh,
after you talking about it,
yeah.
I saw it, it was on TV.
Oh, okay. The image of Santa supporting the enemy had a demoralizing influence on the Confederate Army. Remember I told you last week a little bit about Abraham Lincoln. An early example of psychological warfare. If you make your people hate the enemy, then they can go kill the enemy. That's going on for forever in the armed services and everything. That's the way it's been. 1897, Francis P. Church, editor of the New York Sun, wrote an editorial in response to whether there was really a Santa Claus. It has become known as, Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, letter 4. 1920s, the image of Santa had been standardized to portray a bearded, overweight, jolly man dressed in a red suit with white trim. You see where the history? 1931, Haddon Sunbloom, an illustrator for Coca-Cola Company, drew a series of Santa images in their Christmas advertisements until 1964. The company holds the trademark for Coca-Cola Santa design. Christmas ads including Santa continue to this present day. 1939, copyright Copywriter Robert L. May of Montgomery Ward Company. Remember I told you a little bit about this last week. Created a poem about Rudolph, the ninth reindeer. He may have been often taunted as a child for being shy, small, and sly. He created an ostracized reindeer with a shiny nose, which became a hero. On one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa was part way through deliveries when the visibility started to degenerate. Santa added Rudolph to his team of reindeer who helped illuminate the path. A copy of this poem was given free to Montgomery Ward customers. 1949, Johnny Marks wrote a song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which Gene Autry recorded, and it was the greatest bestseller of all time. Okay? Gene Autry didn't want to sing that song. He didn't think it was cool, but then it became the most recorded and sold song ever in history.
Still is.
1993, an urban folk tale began to circulate about a Japanese department store displaying a life-size Santa Claus being crucified on a cross. All right, now we get into the modern stuff. They tried to replace Jesus with Santa Claus. You have any questions about that? So I got it to you this week. Last week I couldn't get the machine to print. All right. So we got a little bit of history of Christmas, which was yesterday. And now let's go to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is one of the longest and most important books in the Old Testament. One of the longest and most important books in the Old Testament. Now, Isaiah wrote this book. When I was going to college, that meant about. Now it means at. Okay? Things change, you know. All right? Isaiah was written about 800 to 749 BC, somewhere around there. So this is about 800 years before Jesus' time, okay? And he was a writer. He was a prophet, of course. He was a historian. He was a reformer. He was a teacher, and he was a theologian. The book of Isaiah is a great book. Now we're going to go through it very, very fast. All right, we're going to go through it fast, but we're going to slow down in some places. We're going to kind of look. Now, God's people had been rebelling. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
All right, God's people had been rebelling. Ever since the garden, God's had problem with people. Okay? Bill, you didn't say anything. What's wrong with you this morning?
No, I said, yeah, I agree. But I think
I thought you were going to say something about the woman in the garden or something.
It just said, I think, a woman.
All right.
Where were we at in Isaiah, Jim?
We're at
What chapter?
1:1.
1:1?
Yeah, 1:1. All right. The vision of Isaiah the son of Amos concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which he saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. All right. So there we have the period of time that he writes this. Now go on down to number 3, verse number 3 now. Verse number 3, and let's look at verse number 3 and see what he's got to say to Israel. All right? Or Judah. An ox knows its owner. What is an ox? Have anybody ever heard of a dumb ox? You ever called anybody? You ever been called a dumb ox? They used to call people dumb oxes a long time ago. That was a term, a dumb ox. You know, cows not very smart, really, to tell you the truth. They kind of hardly don't know to come in out of the rain, you know. I mean, they're not really overbright. A deer, a buffalo, elk, and things like that, they are pretty smart. But cattle have been pretty much bred to where they're not overly bright. Just as simple as that. All right? An ox knows its owner. And a donkey knows its master and its manger. Okay? They know where to go to eat, don't they? But Israel does not know. My people do not understand. A sinful nation, he says. People weighted down with sin, offspring of evildoers, sons of who act corruptly. They have abandoned Jehovah. All right? So what's God going to do? Verse number 10. It starts here, and he said, God's had enough of you rascals. Enough's enough. There was a song one time, Turn, Turn, Turn. Remember that? They sang that at Buck Owens' song. And we studied that in one of the books. It's a time to weep. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to marry and a time to divorce. There's a time to live and a time to die, a time to sing and a time to be quiet. And God said here, I've had enough of you people. Hear the word of the Lord. You rulers of Sodom. He equates Israel, Judah, with Sodom and Gomorrah. Give an ear to instruction of our God, you people of Gomorrah. All right? Now, when Jesus was on the earth, he said that Israel would be judged more harshly than Sodom and Gomorrah was. That it would be easier on them, Sodom and Gomorrah in hell, than it would be those people that heard the very words come from the Messiah's mouth. The closer you are to the altar of God, the more judgment there is. God's had enough. And then in verse number 18 he said, come now and let us reason together. All right? Let's think about it. In verse 21 he said, Zion is corrupted and needs to be redeemed. In chapter 2 he said that all of the world is God's. All of the world is God's. God, we need to learn about God because God is the king of all the earth. In chapter 3 it says God will remove your leaders and your kings because he is king. All right? And what happened here finally? When Jesus walked on this earth, the Messiah, when he walked on this earth, he went in his triumphant entry into Jerusalem and he took over his kingdom. His kingdom, you know, so many writers say his kingdom was postponed. He took over his kingdom and he gave the reins of that kingdom after he was crucified. Actually, before that he was crucified, he gave the reins of that kingdom to the church, his little ecclesia that he called out by the seashores of Galilee. He said in verse number 13 in chapter 3, he says, God's going to judge. He's going to judge you. All right? And then Judah's women are denounced, ungodly buzzards. He denounces them. He said, I'm going to, you look pretty, you got perfume, you got your headdresses and everything, I'm going to take it all away. He said in chapter 4, there's going to be a remnant prepared. And then he writes a parable in chapter 5 of a vineyard. Let me sing now for my well-beloved, a song for my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill. And he dug all around it, removed its stones, and planted it with a choice of vines, and built a tower in the middle of it. He hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to produce grapes, and good grapes, and all it produced was worthless ones. Does this remind you of the parables that Jesus spoke in Matthew 13? The parables. Even we have a parable of the vineyard in the New Testament. That wasn't brand new. Jesus was explaining from the Old Testament. Now all inhabitants of Jerusalem, men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done? He goes on to say in the New Testament, he said there was the Lord was the vineyard, or owned a great farm. And he rented it out to sharecroppers. And the sharecropper says, hey, here comes the master's son. Let's kill the son and take it by force, and we will have it. Remember this, the wicked land, the wicked tenants? Well, all of that comes from here. And he talks about in chapter 5 and verse 8, woes for the wicked. And then he goes into Isaiah's vision in chapter 6. He has a vision. And in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw The Lord sitting on the throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. A seraphim stood above him, which had 6 wings and had 2 covered his face. Now remember, in the book of Revelation and Ezekiel, also you see these same type of visions. These are theophany, all right? He covered his feet, and 2, and he flew. And one called out, one said another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. Jehovah Sabaoth is what it is, Jehovah Sabaoth. Jehovah Sabaoth. Jehovah, the Lord of armies. Now, in Revelation, again, it talks about Jesus being what? The Lord of lords and the Lord of hosts. The book of James calls Jesus Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. And in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, it says, and I saw Jesus, and on his thigh and on his vesture was what? A name written. In Hebrew, it is Adonai Ha'adonai, the Lord of lords and King of kings. It goes all the way back to the book of Deuteronomy. There's nothing new in the Bible. It just repeats itself over and over again, enforcing most important truths. The whole earth is full of his glory, and the foundations of the threshing holes trembled at his voice, and he called out. What happened when Jehovah met Moses up on Mount Sinai? Huh? The whole mountain shook, and it sounded like 1,000 trumpets when he spoke. Here we have it reinforced again. Okay? Called out while the temple was filling with smoke. All right? Now what happened? Remember when Moses had the tabernacle built, the picture of the tabernacle over there? What happened when they had it built and they put it all together? What happened? What took place? Jehovah Sabaoth appeared. El Shaddai appeared, and they saw the presence of his glory, and it said it was so filled the place that they couldn't see. It was like a thick fog of the glory of God. When Solomon built the temple and replaced basically the tabernacle with a temple, when God took possession of that temple, what took place? I'm going to reinforce this again. The Shekinah glory of God filled it. And it was, they saw a pillar of fire. They saw a pillar of fire in the tabernacle. They saw a pillar of fire in the temple. And it says the glory of the Lord was so thick, and his glory was so bright and thick that they couldn't see where they were walking. How many of you ever looked in the bright lights and then you couldn't see? You know, the old flash cameras and stuff like that. You were blinded for a while. That's the way it was, the glory. Now let's go into the New Testament period of time. God called his church out here. When did the law finish? When was the law? When was the law done away with? We heard in that what?
At the cross.
Okay, it's a little more.
When John the Baptist started dipping.
Until the preaching of John. The law and the prophets were unto John. All right. The cross was finally nailed to the cross. We hear of that. But the law and the prophets were actually until John. Until that is the preaching of the Son of God, the Messiah. Okay? We come to the New Testament period of time. Jesus called out his little assembly when he was walking by the Sea of Galilee. The ecclesia, which we get the term ecclesia. In the New Testament, the word church should not be translated church. That's a hidden, cryptic term. Okay? That's a Church of England used because the Baptists always said in England, when they wrote the King James Bible, the Baptists said, churches are not universal. It is not Catholic. The Catholic Church had called itself the Universal Church. The Church of England called itself the Universal Church of England. All right? And the Baptist says churches are not universal. Churches are visible and local. You see them. And every one of them is responsible for the Lord itself. There's one universal head of the church, but only local, visible New Testament churches. Okay? Now, when the original church, when Jesus told his little church that he called out, he told the church to wait for him where? He told his church to wait for him where? Wait in Jerusalem until you receive power from on high. What would happen? He said, I must go away so I can send the Spirit to you. He will be with you throughout all ages. Okay? I'll be with you through the Spirit until the end of the church age. Now on the day of Pentecost, not when the church started, because the church was already there. It is assembled already. Do you have a pocket? All right. The church was there. Can you put your hand in your pocket? All right. You put your hand in your pocket because you have a pocket. The church was already assembled there on the day of Pentecost. It's like a pocket. You couldn't put your hand in your pocket unless it was there. He was there. The church, the ecclesia, once called out, were meeting, waiting for the Lord. And what happened to the church on the day of Pentecost? What did they see upon the people's heads?
A light, the Spirit.
Flames of fire. What happened at the tabernacle? What happened at the temple? Only Solomon's temple. The Shekinah glory was never in the other temples. Only in Solomon's temple. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant was only in Solomon's temple. They had a facsimile Ark of the Covenant, but read 2 Maccabees, the 2nd chapter. That's the history of Israel. You find out everybody wants to know where the Ark of the Covenant is. 2 Maccabees tells you where it is. Jeremiah, being warned of God, 2 Maccabees, 2nd chapter, God told him to take the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle and go hide it in the mountain where Moses looked over the promised land. So over there in Jordan today, somewhere is where the Ark of the Covenant is. Okay? They had a facsimile after that, but never the Ark of the Covenant ever since. Now they got all this idea that it was hidden in Africa, Ethiopia, and whatever, because Queen of Sheba took it down there. She did take a facsimile down there, but the real one, God had them hide it. You think he's going to send the thing to Africa? Well, on the day of Pentecost, the flames of fire came and landed on the heads of those church members, because now we, in every New Testament church, we have the true Spirit of God leading us into all truth. The Shekinah glory is still with us today. It would never fail. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, Matthew 16 and 18. Now, let's look at something. We have a war going to come against Jerusalem. Isaiah receives his commission in 6, 8. In the 7th chapter, we have days of war are going to come in. Then go over here to chapter 7 and verse 10. Let's look at this. Isaiah 7:14. Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign for yourself from the Lord, and make it deep as Sheol, or high as heaven. Deep as Sheol. Sheol. What is that Sheol is the Hebrew word for the place of departed spirits, isn't it? And by the way, at this period of time, is all one place. The bad and the good went to one place. Okay? Sheol. Something like this. All right? Sheol. Sheol means the place asked about. Okay? What's the Greek word for it? Hades. Hades. All right, that's Hades. Okay? Now, at this period of time, he said, as high as heaven, as deep as Sheol. Here's the earth. Way down yonder, some places where Sheol is, and way up here is the abode of God in the third heaven. Okay? We know that. So way down here is Sheol. As deep as Sheol, or as high as heaven. That's what he said. He tells us where Sheol is and where heaven is. Okay? And the book of Revelation tells us that hell, Hades, is down under the earth. Kata Hipo, down under the earth. Not in the earth, but down under. Way out here somewhere is where Sheol is. Okay? Now let's go and look at over here before Jesus died, even after he died for a short time, is paradise. This is called Abraham's bosom. Over here is the place of torment. Okay? That's the place of torment. Now, evidently, these dudes over here could look over here. And they could look over there. I think that they could look from here to there, and one of the torments us, because these people are being comforted over here. Hell is looking over to Sheol on this side now for a time. We know that. We have Luke the 16th chapter telling us that. By the way, that's not a parable. A lot of your Bibles put in parable of the rich man and Lazarus. It's not a parable at all. That is a historical account. Those people really existed. Parables are an illustration, but that's not an illustration. That's for truth. Even if it wasn't an illustration, but it wasn't, it would still be true. All right. So from over here, we had Abraham's bosom. And over here, we had the place of torment. And there was a guy that died. His name was Dives, or Nineveh. And he's looking over here, and he's seeing Lazarus, a guy that sat at his gate. And he looked over there, and he said, hey, send him over here with just a drop of water on his finger so he can quench my torments. Now, this man wasn't in his body yet, was he? But he had the feelings of having a body. All right, he felt like he had a body. He thirsted. He hungered. He felt heat. He felt torment. He could hear. He could see. He could taste in this spirit form that he had. He looked and he suffered. But here, when people are resurrected out of Sheol, they're going to be placed in their unregenerated, unglorified bodies, and they're going to be cast into hell to sit there and burn and torments forever and ever. And it says their bodies will be like asbestos in Hebrew. Okay? Anyway, here was it was before. High as heavens and as deep as Sheol, okay? Make it as high as heaven or deep as Sheol. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, listen now, O house of David, is it too slight of a thing for you to try the patience of men, that you will not try the patience of my God as well? Therefore the Lord will give you himself a what? A sign. Now this is very unusual. In Hebrew, this is very straight. All right? Now, this was fulfilled 2 times. This is the dual prophecy, okay? This is a dual prophecy. That's a double prophecy. How many of you have heard this? Anybody ever heard it? Anybody preach on this? Isaiah 7:14 before? Nobody? Okay. Some people steer clear of it. Now the King James only people and all this kind of bunch, you know, the ones that don't know anything about Hebrew or Greek or whatever, you know, they're going to tell you what I'm saying to you is heresy. But this is factual history. Okay? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Now in the American Standard Bible that came out one time, it translated this word correctly. And they had people had a wall-eyed conniption fit. Okay? You want a wall-eyed conniption fit in? Okay. Because they don't know the Bible. That's why. They just, when people see something that scares them and they don't understand, they don't want to look into it, they just say, ha, that's wrong. Okay? Now therefore the Lord himself, Jehovah himself, will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Okay, now this is a dual prophecy. First of all, back in these days, it said a virgin. What does virgin mean?
Mine says a young woman.
All right. It's Alma. Okay, Alma. Alma. Alma means the sexually ripe woman. Remember when we talked about Santa Claus a while ago when these girls became sexually ripe about 12, 13 years old? He was going to sell them into prostitution. And Nicholas threw in a bag of gold and landed in the deal, and so then he could marry them all. When a woman becomes sexually mature, she's called an Alma. She's in marrying age. Back in those days, it was 13, 14 years old. Mary was probably 13 years old or 12 or somewhere around there when she was engaged to Joseph. Okay? Alma. Now, she was, it said, a young woman. basically a married woman. Okay? I'll give you this, this young woman is going to be with child. Now, there's nothing unusual about women getting pregnant, is there? You women have been pregnant? Anybody around here been pregnant? Woman? Okay. All right, nothing unusual about a woman getting pregnant. Okay. And she will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name what? Emmanuel. Well, what does that mean? God with us. God with us. That's fact. Now, let me tell you this about this birth. This is not the term for virgin. But, later on at 300 BC, around 300 BC, when the Hebrew Greek scholars translated this, the first time this had already been fulfilled. This was a dual prophecy, a double prophecy, a two-way prophecy. Okay? Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 is the same thing. When you go to Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, it's talking about what? The king of Tyre and also the king of Babylon. Both of these guys in dual prophecy, one of it's talking about them and one of it's talking about Satan. It's a dual prophecy. Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, both of them. Those are dual prophecies, double prophecies, talking about the king that was existed, but this king represented Satan also. Double prophecies. Here we have a double prophecy, right here. First of all, there was going to be a woman, going to get pregnant, and she's going to bring forth this child at this period of time. And she's a young woman. But by the time around 280, 300 BC, when they translated the Septuagint, that first part had already been fulfilled. So the next time when they do the Septuagint translation is in Greek. There's a term for a young woman in Greek, gine. We got our gynecologist from that word. Okay. All medical terms come from Greek. All legal terms come from Latin. Okay. Now,
That's because Latin's a corrupt language.
no, that's not the reason.
I thought lawyers being corrupt come from...
Well, they are definitely corrupt. You know, remember, Lot was a lawyer in the Old Testament with Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, he was in the gate. He was a lawyer and a judge. Okay, let's go back now. The word Latin. The reason why Latin is the legal language. The Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the so-called Holy Roman Empire, when they took the Bible out of the hands of the people, they had, remember we had the old fellow that lived over there in Bethlehem, he translated what we call the Latin Vulgate, Jerome, the Latin Vulgate. And nobody but the lawyers and doctors and judges knew Latin. The common man didn't know Latin, they knew Greek, Koine Greek. They took the language of the Bible out of the language of the people, and then it made it illegal for anybody to have a Bible in Greek, which they could read, and they put it in Latin. There's where you had your Latin, your legal terms come from. All of the lawyers, all the judges, and all the doctors back then had to write their theses in Latin. You can even buy some of those theses that go all the way back to 3, 4, 5, and 600 AD. You can buy those, they sell them still. But they were all written in Latin. So now, in America, the lawyers learn Latin. All their terms are Latin, okay? The doctors used to write their prescriptions in Latin a long time ago. Here they were Greek medical terms, but they wrote their prescriptions in Latin, which didn't make much sense. This virgin here, this young woman, the second time they translated this, it would be Parthenos, which is virgin. She's set aside. She's totally set apart. So the first time it was fulfilled, a woman had a child. And named his name Emmanuel. The second time, it said that he will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. All right. So here we have it. We see trials are coming for Judah. 7 and verse 17. We have Damascus and Samaria fall. In chapter 8, there's going to be a believing remnant. And then the birth and the reign of the Prince of Peace, we have the Prince of Peace coming. Who is that? This is the reign of Jesus. is talking about here. All right? And it said here in 7 and verse 6, for a child is born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be rest upon his shoulders. It's talking about Jesus. Okay? 9 and verse 6, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father. Actually, what it actually means in Hebrew is Father of eternity. In the New Testament, it said he is the firstborn of the creation. It does not say firstborn of creation in the New Testament. It says the head of creation. He is the head of all creation. All right? Calls him the Father of eternity, the Prince of Peace, and there will be no end to the increase of his government of peace, or the throne of David over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness, for then on and forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts, Jehovah Sabaoth, will accomplish this. Jesus, when he comes back right here, what's he going to come back? How's he going to come back? He's going to come back with his armies, isn't he?
All his glory.
White horse.
With his own white horses. His army's going to be on white horses. He is on white horses. How many have ever heard of in the Indian Wars, they had the Montana Volunteers? John Gregory Burke rode with those guys. The army that was put together out of the Montana Volunteers, he said that these rascals and scoundrels were so bad. John Chivington, when he went after Black Kettle at the massacre, Sand Creek Massacre, he went into all the bars and all the brothels and everything all through Colorado and got the worst low-life bunch of scumbags that you could possibly ever have as his soldiers. And he said, every woman you could rape, kill, pillage, steal, whatever it is, that's your wages. The Montana Volunteers that they took in there after Crazy Horse and stuff, the people on my father's side of the family, the Montana Volunteers, John Gregory Burke, he said there was not a one man in that group that couldn't go and get free room and board from the state because he was wanted for some crime, either murder or whatever. One of them they called Utah John. Have you ever heard of the old song Utah Carol?
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's a Utah John also, or Ute John, whatever you want to call it. They said he killed his grandmother and drank her blood. Bad characters, terrible. He said they took their saddles off. The officers would take their saddles and everything they owned off of their horses at night time and sleep on them. Because in the morning, this bunch of scoundrels would probably steal everything they had. They had to sleep with everything they had. Because they were a den of thieves in this Montana Volunteers. Horrible people. When Jesus comes back with his army, they're going to be dressed in what?
What?
Righteousness. A whole different story. Thought I'd just throw a little bit of history at you while you hear that. That might be interesting. His army is going to be dressed in white. They're going to be on white horses. On white horses. God's anger with Israel and Israel's arrogance. In 9 and verse 8. Assyria is God's instrument. Now remember when Jonah was going to go to Assyria, Nineveh? When Jonah went and preached to Nineveh? He didn't want to go, did he? But what happened to Jonah? The book of Jonah. We're kind of covering that also in here. When Jonah was going to go to Nineveh, which is Assyria, he was going to preach to them. Nineveh had invented a horrible form of the death penalty. It was called impaling at that time. All right? They would put a person on a sharp stick and put it, and it would go up through their body. Slowly, they'd grease this sharp stick, and they'd set them on it. They couldn't get off of it. They'd set on the thing, and it would go up through their body, through their bowels, and slowly rupture everything, and they would die slowly. The Romans perfected it into the cross, which Jesus was crucified on. But it started out as a stake. A stake. It evolved. Well, Jonah knew about all of this business. Them being invented impaling and all of this, and by the way, God was going to use them as an instrument to punish Israel. So when God called Jonah to go to preach to Nineveh, he wouldn't go. He got on a ship going in the opposite direction, didn't he? Then there was a great storm that came upon the sea. God prepared. I preached a sermon on one time. The things were ordained by God, preordained. God ordained a storm. He ordained a ship. He foreordained a fish to swallow Jonah. Jonah was swallowed by the great fish. They talk about the whale. Jonah and the whale's gone. He was in a fish, it said. And Jonah died. Jonah was not alive in the fish's belly. He was dead in the fish's belly. He died. The miracle was not that God kept him alive in the fish's belly, is that God raised him from the dead. How do we know he's dead in the fish's belly? I mean, a lot of Sunday school teachers, once in a while, it's not unusual that somebody can be swallowed by a fish and spit out 3 days later. All this kind of baloney. That's hogwash. The man died in the fish's belly. Jesus used an example. He said, I will give you one sign, the sign of Jonah. What did he say? The Son of Man will be in the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. He'd be dead. His body would be dead. Jonah was dead in the fish's belly. And God used that fish. He ordained, predestined that fish to go over there and spit him out on the shores of Nineveh. And he spit him out alive. Jonah cried unto the Lord from where? The fish's belly? Or from Sheol? Sheol is where he cried out from. He cried out from Sheol. Look it up. The original language really will fix people's theology a lot of times. It makes a lot of difference. So God's going to use Assyria. He went in there and he preached to them, and he didn't want to preach to them, did he? But God made him. He prepared, he ordained, he predestined a fish to spit him out there. And then he worked on those, the Spirit of God worked on those people, and the king repented, and everybody repented. And then Jonah went and pouted, didn't he? And God, a seed out there, he made this vine come up and gave him shade, and then God withered the vine. And he sat there, mad because the vine river. He said, fella, he said, I had all of these children here and everybody in this whole town, hundreds of thousands of people that have repented. And you're crying over one dead vine. And all these people have been born again. All right, let's go on now. The righteous reign, the reign of the branch. The branch. What is the word for branch or root or tree limb in Hebrew? Anybody know? Natzer. Natzer. Jesus was a branch out of dry ground. Where did he grow up? He was born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem. That means house of bread. Okay? He was carried down into Egypt because old Herod wanted to kill him. And then he was raised in what town?
Jerusalem?
No. Where was Jesus raised? Where did he go to synagogue? Where did he go to bar mitzvah and all that stuff? What was the name of the town? Nazareth. Nazareth. Which the root of it is Natzer, branch. Okay? Natzer or branch. All right. The righteous reign. Then a shoot will spring up from the stem of Jesse. All right. Jesus was of the lineage of Jesse, remember? Mary. All right. A branch from its roots will bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him. What happened at John's baptism? When John baptized Jesus, what happened? They physically saw a theophany. They heard the Father speak from heaven. They saw the Spirit of God come and rest upon Jesus like a dove. It wasn't a dove, but it looked like a dove, flying. And they saw the Son. We see the whole triune God there. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and strength, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord, and he will not judge but what his eyes see, nor make a decision by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he will judge the poor. And who did he preach to? When John the Baptist, after he was arrested, and he was in prison and he was going to get his head chopped off, he sent some messengers to Jesus and his church, didn't he? And what did he ask him? Remember what he asked him? Anybody know? Marilyn, do you know what he asked him? Nobody here in this room knows. What did John the Baptist ask Jesus and his disciples? He said, are you the Messiah, or is there another one coming? And what did Jesus say? The gospel is preached to the poor. The blind see. The healing of the blind was only a messianic credential. No one else ever healed the blind but Jesus. And he healed a lot of blind people. The lame walk, and the lepers are cured. Leprosy was absolutely a disease that was a death penalty. And it was terminal, and it was done for. I mean, you were done for. Only God could heal leprosy, they said. He will decide with parents that afflicted, and he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth and with the breath of his lips, and he will slay the wicked. Now that jumps all the way over here. And even here. All right. And righteousness will be the belt about his loins. Remember in the book of Revelation. The faithfulness, the belt about his waist, and the wolf will dwell with the lamb. Here's talking about the millennial reign. It's jumping. See, Isaiah is looking far ahead. The restored remnant in verse 11 of chapter 11. The Thanksgiving Express prophecies about Babylon now. All right. And Isaiah 14, Israel's taunt. And here we, remember I told you dual prophecies. Isaiah has two dual prophecies, Isaiah 7:14, and now we have Isaiah 14, 12 through 15. It's talking about the king of Babylon, all right? How are you fallen from heaven, star of the morning? Now this is talking about the king of Babylon, all right, but it's also talking about Lucifer. Dual prophecy. Yet you have been cut down to the earth, you have been weakened the nations, you have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, and I will raise my throne above the stars of God. All right? And I will set on the mount of the assembly in recesses of the north, and I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will make myself high like the Most High. Remember? This is the prophecy of what Lucifer did in eternity past. Okay? Nevertheless, you will be thrust down to Sheol, to the recesses of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and will ponder over you. And is this the man who made the earth to tremble? The king of Babylon did that, and so did Lucifer. Who shook the kings and made the world a wilderness? In Genesis 1 and verse 2, 1 and 1 says, Barashith bara, Elohim et hashemayim we et haaretz. And then it says, Viha haaretz. And the earth, she became formless and void. God created the heavens and the earth, and He made it perfect. And then the earth, she became formless and void, and dissolution. Tohu was over the faces of the deep, El Panay Tahom. Over the faces of the deep. And the Spirit God, it said, suffered over, mourned over the face of the deep. And what we have in Genesis 1 is a reconstruction of the earth after Lucifer destroyed it. He brought desolation. Brother Bill.
Yeah, Jim, this Isaiah, just come to me, this Isaiah 11 and 12 here. This is where another part like Ezekiel chapter 42, Jesus is saying, I'm going to gather my people back together.
It's dual prophecy. Yeah, He's going to gather His people. All right. And then Lucifer here, and you made the world, the cosmos, like a wilderness, and overthrew its cities, and did not allow its prisoners to go home. All right, now let's go on a little further. We talk about the judge on Moab, the judgment on Philistia, the Philistine, chapter 16, Moab's, and then prophecy about Damascus in chapter 17, chapter 18, message to Ethiopia, 19, a message to Egypt, prophecy about Egypt in chapter 20 in Ethiopia. God commands that Babylon will be taken. God's going to bring down Babylon. All right. He set Nebuchadnezzar up, didn't He? And He used Nebuchadnezzar to chastise Israel. And then He brought Nebuchadnezzar down. All right. All of this happens. Valley of the Vision, the oracles about Edom and Arabia. All right. Calling from Seir. God would judge Edom. He would judge what we call Petra, the city of Petra. And then He's going to use Petra as a place in the last days for Israel to flee and God's going to protect them there. Let's keep on going. Judgment upon the earth. He talked about judgment. Tyre and Sidon, the song of praise for God's favor, the song of trust in God's protection, chapter 26.
Was Tyre, why did he destroy Tyre? He burned it,
Tyre and
didn't
Sidon.
he? Yeah.
Yeah, he destroyed Tyre because they thumbed their nose at God.
'Cause it was
God used them one time, but then he sent Alexander the Great against them, and there's a whole Ezekiel the 28 and here in Isaiah, Ezekiel 28 tells about the destruction down to the T of what God's going to do to Tyre and Sidon, down to everything that would happen. And this is all prophecy, hundreds of years before it happened. Okay, Ephraim's captivity predicted. All right, deliverance of Israel. Judah is warned in 28 and verse 14. Jerusalem is warned in 29 and verse 1. And Judah is warned against the Egyptian alliance in chapter 30. Help not in Egypt, but in God, chapter 31. The judgment of God in chapter 33. Zion's happy future in 35. God's wrath against the nations, chapter 34. Sennacherib invades Judah in chapter 36. Hezekiah seeks a vision of health. Here we have King Hezekiah, Hezekiah's prayer in the temple. And God answers through Isaiah. Assyrians destroyed, 37 and verse 36. Hezekiah healed. Remember when Hezekiah was going to die and he was healed? Hezekiah shows his treasures and the greatness of God, and when he did that, that was a real problem. All right, Israel is encouraged in chapter 41. Chapter 42, God's promise concerning his servant. All right. Israel is redeemed, going to be redeemed. Chapter 43, Israel is God's witness. Babylon is destroyed in 43 and verse 14. The shortcomings of Israel start in verse 22. The blessings of Israel, Isaiah 44. The folly of idolatry in 44 and verse 9. God uses Cyrus, King Cyrus. This is where he's going to use him to bring Israel back in the land and everything. God's supreme power in verse number 8. Babylonians' idols and the true God contrasted. The lament for Babylon in chapter 47, and we have it again in the book of Revelation. Babylon is the one world empire in the last days is called Babylon. It's called the mother of all harlots. Israel's hard-headedness in chapter 48, the deliverance is promised. Salvation reaches to the end of the earth in 49. It talks about God's promise, the promise to Zion in 49 and verse 14. God helps his servant in 50. Israel is exhorted in 51. And a cheer for prostate Zion. If they will repent, God will be happy, and they will be happy. Isaiah 53, this is very important. How many of you heard that the Jews don't have Isaiah 53 in their Bibles? Because this is so plain. Have anybody heard that? I heard it many times. You ever heard that, Brother David? That the Jews, Isaiah won't, that it's not in chapter 53? Well, here's the Jewish Bible. We'll just put all that to rest. Here's the Jewish Bible. It's Hebrew. All right? In English. Both Hebrew and English. All right? Over here in Isaiah, chapter 53, they do have Isaiah 53 in their Bible. All right? They do have Isaiah 53. Now let's look at Isaiah 53. And let's see what it says. Isaiah 53. This is very important because this is talking about the Messiah. By the way, they translate it fairly correct. Isaiah 53 is a psalm about Jesus. Who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? The arm of Jehovah, his strength. He grew up before him like a tender shoot. Again, we have the word Natzer right there. See that? That's the word Natzer in Hebrew. Okay? Like a tender shoot. Like a root out of parched ground in Nazareth. That's what it's talking about. They knew exactly where he was going to be born in Bethlehem. They knew exactly where he would be raised. Israel had all the information. They were responsible for it. They knew the very day that Daniel had prophesied, the very day that Jesus would walk in and ride in his triumphant entry into Jerusalem. They knew the day that he was going to be born. They knew his mother and father were on earth. Matthew's gospel writes Joseph's lineage. Now, Joseph wasn't really Jesus' father, but he was like his stepfather, okay? And because Joseph should have been on the throne of Israel instead of that toad, Herod. Herod was Esau's descendant, not Jacob's descendant. Jacob's descendant was Joseph. Matthew gives you the lineage of Joseph. Luke gives you the lineage of Jesus through Mary. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. Let me get my other Bible out here. Brought half a dozen Bibles this morning. My notes are better in this one. The arm, the physical, the flesh. John 1:14, Kai ho logos sarx aganto, and the word flesh he became, and Jehovah flesh he became, and dwelt among us. 1:18, and God led himself out of eternity into space and time in the person of Jesus Christ. Okay? Tender shoot, he grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground, Nazareth. He has no stately form or majesty so that we should look upon him, no appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, even his own church. Even Peter denounced him, didn't he? A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, and when we did not esteem him, surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was pierced through for our transgressions. His hands were pierced. It literally says that his wrists were pierced, and his feet were pierced. Now, when he wrote this, there was no such thing as the Roman idea of crucifixion. It had not been invented yet. Psalm 22, we looked at Psalm 22. Psalm 22 talks about the crucified Messiah. When Psalm 22 was written by David, crucifixion was not invented yet. This is prophecy, people. Smitten of God, he was pierced through for our transgression, he was crushed for our iniquities. The word crushed there in Psalm 22, and it's talking about crushing a worm where they got red dye. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourgings we are healed. And we like sheep have gone astray, each one of us turned his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall upon him. He was oppressed, he was afflicted. He did not open his mouth like a lamb. He was the lamb that every lamb in the Old Testament, all the way from the Garden of Eden, through all of the history of the law, up until John and up until the temple in Jerusalem, even Herod's temple, every lamb represented Jesus. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter. Like a sheep that is silent before her shearers. A little female lamb, that's what it says. And he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generations, who considered it? It says here, now the Mormons always have Jesus having children. And by the way, according to the Mormon theology, Joseph Smith is a physical descendant of Jesus with Mary. And of course you have what was this thing that came out here a few years ago, I guess it now, the book that was written about Mary's descendants, and then we had the big movie on television and everything. What was the name of that movie?
That thing.
When they were looking for the descendants of Mary. the Holy Grail or whatever, you know. They were all
The
looking.
guy that wrote that said he made it up.
Yeah.
He admitted to it, and they
Yeah.
still don't believe him. What was that thing called?
But see, the Mormons believe this. The Mormons ought to fall for that hook, line, and sinker because they believe that Mary did have children and that Jesus had several wives and they had children and Joseph Smith is a descendant of them. But it says here in the book of Isaiah that he will have no descendants. He will not have any offspring. I believe Isaiah over Joseph Smith and over this other guy that wrote whatever that was. Can't even think of it. His grave was with the wicked men. He was buried with sinners. Remember who came and buried him in his sepulcher?
Joseph of
Well,
Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea. And Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea came and begged his body from Pilate. With a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth, but the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, his seed, all right, and will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied by his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, where all the capital He's and Him there, they have it in lowercase. It's just, when you come to, in the Bible, when you come to where it's talking about Jesus or God, actually it should be like this in all capitals, not like this. All right? It should be like that. Not him, but him. Capital him because it's talking about deity. They will not capitalize it in this one. But the book, Isaiah 53, is there. Because this Isaiah 53 is so plain to see that it is Jesus that it's talking about. Therefore I allot him portion with the great. He will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he himself bore the sin of many to intercede for the transgressors. We have one intercessor between man and God, and who is it? Jesus. Thank you for your attention. I brought a lot of material to you today in a short time. And I didn't get to, we got up to Isaiah 53, didn't we? And we'll start there next week. Are you enjoying this fast Bible study? I mean,
Yeah.
you can go in but I want to get you so you'll understand what the Bible's talking about. Isaiah is a tremendously important book. Brother David.
Me?
It's yours
If
now.
we did- if-
Thank you for enduring the good seats. Thank you for your prayer.
If we did this book on Wednesday night, it would take us like 5 years.
Yes. By the way, Wednesday night we are having class. Nobody else is having a class in this church, but we're teaching the book of Romans here. All right? We'll teach the book of Romans.
Yeah, there was plenty of parking spots last Wednesday.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it. You can park right up here.
We just park on anywhere you wanted. Okay, on our prayer list, I didn't hand one out because Dave didn't have anything and I didn't have anything.